In 1975, an American neuroscientist published a book that opened with one of the strangest definitions of God ever offered by a research scientist. He did not call God a being, a force, or a presence. He called God a position. The position at the top of a person's priority hierarchy. Whatever sits there, he wrote, controls everything else. The neuroscientist's name was John C. Lilly. The book was Simulations of God, the Science of Belief. And the strangest part of the work was not the definition. It was where the definition came from. Lilly did not arrive at it in a temple, a monastery, or a library. He arrived at it inside a sealed steel chamber filled with body-temperature salt water 2 decades earlier, watching what his own mind did when nothing else was happening to it. What it did, he wrote, was keep running. Old fears with no external source. Authority figures from decades earlier issuing commands as if they were standing beside him in the dark. Sexual scripts playing on loop with no stimulus to play them. Beliefs he had never knowingly chosen announcing themselves as absolute and unquestionable truth. A thought, he came to understand, is rarely an act of authorship. It is the visible end of a command the mind did not write. What follows is the architecture he mapped beneath that observation. The simulations the group installs without permission. The way the ego disguises itself as awakening. The survival drives that decide before the mind has time to weigh in. The difference between believing something and holding it as if true. And the practice he proposed at the end of his life, for anyone willing to test the work on themselves. The material is older than the modern wellness language laid on top of it. It is harder, it is more specific, and once one of these simulations is seen running, it cannot be unseen. What he found in that tank, he spent the rest of his career mapping. The framework that came out of it had one core observation, direct enough that it has been argued with ever since. What sits in the God position is not always called God. It rarely is. The position can be filled by money, by sex, by group approval, by the ego itself, by science, by death. Each of these operates as a complete operating system. It filters what is noticed. It dictates what is valued, and it conceals itself from awareness while it does the work. That last part is the part Lilly would not let his readers escape. The simulation does not present itself as a simulation. It presents itself as reality, as common sense, as the way things obviously are. He identified more than 20 of these running in human minds, and the finding underneath them was severe. Roughly 9 out of every 10 beliefs operate beneath conscious awareness. The handful at the surface are what most people would call their opinions. The much larger field underneath, the field that actually directs decisions, reactions, and what is even allowed to be noticed, was never agreed to in any conscious moment. It was placed there while no one was looking. The architecture is testable. Take a belief held with high confidence, one that feels obvious, one defended in every argument. Then look for its origin, not the moment it was first heard, not the moment someone respected repeated it, the moment when, in solitude, away from any audience, it was examined from the outside and recognized as one's own. For most beliefs, no such moment exists. The belief was never chosen. The group chose it, and the group did not announce itself. Lilly spent years in those tanks mapping how the installation works. What he found was not subtle. After enough hours alone, stripped of every social input, he wrote that he began to see himself as nothing but a cross-correlated member of multiple groups, with no other identity beneath. Family, nation, profession, political tribe, religious background, social circle. Each one had written rules into his operating system, and the rules were not optional. They dictated which emotions were acceptable, which ambitions were realistic, which questions could be asked, and, most quietly, most powerfully, which states of consciousness were permitted. This is the part of the work that should be sat with carefully. Every group, in Lily's observation, places a boundary on what its members are allowed to experience inside their own minds. Bliss is forbidden unless supervised. Ecstasy is suspect. Mystical states are reserved for saints or for people from far away. The group says, happiness is allowed within parameters. Reality may be questioned, but only in approved directions. Thought may be free, as long as the conclusions match the group's. This is not a description of an ancient cult. This is the quiet condition of belonging. This is the algorithm feeding a person opinions they mistake for their own. It is the social circle that goes quiet when one member shifts. It is the profession with detailed language for failure, but no language for awakening. It is the entire architecture of permitted inner life. And the test that exposes it is the one Lily ran on himself. Removal. When the group is gone, actually gone, not stepped away from for a weekend, the ones who do not break begin to notice something odd. Thoughts arrive that have no source in any group ever belonged to. They feel different. They do not have the polished, repeated edge of a borrowed opinion. They have the rough texture of something that has not been pre-approved. Most never reach this. The group is too tightly woven into the operating system. The body sits in solitude. The mind is still in committee. Beneath the group lies the program the group cannot reach. Older than the group. Stranger. The ego. In Lily's framework, the ego is not what most people imagine. It is not the witness. It is not the soul. It is not the inner voice that knows. It is a subroutine, one with a convincing story about being in charge. The proof is plain. The ego has preferences it did not choose. It has fears it cannot explain. It has reactions that fire before it has time to think. If the ego were truly the operator, if it were the one in control, it could stop a thought mid-sentence. It could decide not to be angry. It could choose to feel nothing about an insult. It cannot, because the thing called I is not the operator. It is another program, one with a louder voice and a more polished cover story than the rest. Lily saw this everywhere, not only inside individuals, inside whole civilizations. When a species decides it is the highest intelligence in the universe, that nothing else could match its complexity, it stops looking. It stops listening. He spent 12 years trying to communicate with dolphins, animals with brains larger than ours, and he watched the scientific establishment dismiss the work, not because the evidence was weak, but because the simulation would not allow it. If humans are God, then nothing else gets to be intelligent. The same logic that makes the ego claim the throne in one skull makes a species claim the throne in the universe. And the cost is identical. Information that does not confirm the simulation stops arriving. He wrote that a God trapped by human belief systems, accountable only inside those systems, is not large enough for the universe as we know it. The God a person carries must be larger than the ego, or the ego becomes the entire universe. And a prison is mistaken for a kingdom. This is the trap that thinking cannot solve. Thinking is what the ego does. The trap responds to one move only, the same move that broke the group simulation. Removal. In the tank, Lily watched the ego perform its constant act of authorship. A peaceful moment arrives, and within seconds, that was good work. I earned this rest. A small insight surfaces, and immediately, I see what others have missed. A wave of openness moves through the chest, and already the script is running. I am the kind of person who feels things deeply. Each time, the credit claim arrives just behind the actual experience, never in front of it, always with a story attached. He did not fight it. He did not suppress it. He simply noted, again and again, that I had shown up to take credit. Eventually, a small distance forms. There is the experience itself, and there is the voice that arrives after to claim it. That distance between the raw event and the story constructed about the event is the first opening in the simulation. On the other side of it, Lilly found something he could not quite name. He called it essence, and he admitted the word was inadequate. But before anyone goes looking for essence, there is one more layer beneath the ego that has to be made visible. Because if it stays hidden, it will stage the entire search. The layer beneath the ego is older than thought, older than language, older than the first social group humans ever formed. It is the survival circuit, the set of drives written into the body before any belief was placed on top of them. Hunger, thirst, fear of falling, fear of being cast out, the pull toward warmth, the pull toward sex, the reflex that tightens the gut before any reasoning has happened. These were not put there in error. They kept the species alive. But Lilly's observation, and the part most readers move past too quickly, was that nearly every thought, opinion, and decision believed to be reasoned is, on closer inspection, a translation of one of these drives into language. The career path chosen out of love for the work, examined honestly, traces back to a fear of being cast out by the family of origin. The political conviction that feels rationally arrived at, examined honestly, traces back to a fear of resources running out. The romantic preference that feels personal, examined honestly, traces back to a survival template imprinted before the age of 7. This is the architecture of the human mind, not a cynical view of it. Reason runs on top of survival. Survival does not run on top of reason. When the two conflict, survival wins, and the part of the mind that calls itself rational is the part that has never noticed. It has been losing the argument for 40 years. Lilly's instruction here was specific, not to override the survival drives, that fails every time, but to make them visible, to name the drive operating beneath any strong opinion before treating the opinion as one's own. When a survival drive is dressed in the language of philosophy, the simulation is at its most active. That is where it does its best work. There is a way to test this on a recent decision. Not a small one, a real one. The reason given to the self for it. Then beneath that reason, the threat being avoided, the loss being prevented, the absence of warmth being warded off. There is almost always one. The reason was the cover story. The drive was the operator. To see this is uncomfortable. The mind resists this observation more than it resists almost any other. The resistance itself is data. The simulation is most defended where it is most active. So the architecture is now visible. The group, installing what is permitted to think and feel. The ego, claiming credit for everything that arrives. The survival circuit, dressing its drives in the language of philosophy. And underneath all three, the thing that holds them in place, belief itself. Not any specific belief. The act of believing. The closure that happens when the mind decides something is settled and stops examining it. This is where Lilly's protocol becomes practical. He proposed a single shift, not believed, held as if true. The shift sounds small. It rewrites the operating mode entirely. When something is believed, the mind closes around it. The matter is decided. New information that contradicts the belief is filtered out before it reaches awareness. The belief becomes a wall, then a room, then a world. The believer cannot see out of it because the wall has become the eyes. When something is held as if true, the mind stays open. The proposition is used. It is tested. It is allowed to function, but it is never sealed. New information arrives. Contradictions register. The proposition can be revised, replaced, or dropped without an identity crisis because no identity was ever fused to it. Take a single position and hold it this way for 1 week. Held as if true, not believed. Notice what happens in the body. The constant low-grade tension that came from defending it disappears. The room around the proposition opens up. Other propositions, previously invisible, become visible. The proposition is still acted on. The work still gets done. The operator is no longer trapped inside the operating system. That single move, from true to as if true, is the most practical instruction in simulations of God. It is also the move that the group, the ego, and the survival circuit all resist. Each of them is held in place by something the host is required to believe in order to remain a member, a self, or alive in the imagined sense. When the believer becomes the holder, the simulation begins to thin. Lilly named the practice at the end of his work 4 movements of withdrawal, and a 5th thing that is not a movement at all. They are not steps in a sequence. They are doors that open into the same room. The order does not matter. First, the voices. The first movement is internal. The body can stay where it is. What withdraws is the inner conversation with the group's voices. Sit with a single belief and notice how many people are in the room with it. Mother, father, the first authority figure, the teacher, the friend whose disapproval still stings at age 40, the professional culture that decided which questions were serious. Each voice identified separately. The voices are not silenced. That is not the goal. They are made visible. When the voices are visible, the silence underneath them becomes audible for the first time. Second, the narrator. Each time a flash of clarity, peace, or insight arrives, watch what happens half a second later. The narrator rushes in to take credit for what the awareness produced. Note the rush. Do not block it. Do not argue with it. Just see, again and again, that I shows up after the fact, never before, always with a script. Over time, the script begins to sound rehearsed. And once a script sounds rehearsed, it loses authority. Third, the drive beneath the reason. Pick a strong opinion. Beneath the opinion, name the threat. What is being defended against? What loss is being prevented? What exclusion is being warded off? The opinion does not have to change. The drive only has to become visible. When it is visible, the opinion no longer has to do the drive's work in disguise. Fourth, the grip of belief. Take any held position, political, spiritual, personal, professional, and shift its grip. Held as if true. Use it, test it, let it function. Do not seal it. Something in the body softens within the first hour. The defensiveness attached to the position lifts, and underneath it, the position itself often turns out to be more useful than it was when it was sealed. Belief was its weight, not its truth. What stays after the 4? It is what is left when each of the 4 has happened. There is no instruction for it. When the group is quiet, when the narrator has paused, when the survival drives are visible instead of invisible, when beliefs are held loosely instead of locked. There is a moment, brief, easily missed, where no program is running at all. Not the group member, not the ego, not the survival machine, not the believer. For 1 second, the awareness that was there before any of those were installed. Lilly did not name it, The word he used was essence, and he said the word was not enough. Other traditions have called it consciousness without an object, the witness, the unconditioned, the ground. None of the names is sufficient. What matters is that, for 1 second, the difference between the software and what is running the software has been felt. And once it has been felt, it cannot be unfelt. Every simulation encountered after that moment carries a thin border of light around it, a frame the awareness can see. And the moment the frame is visible, the picture is no longer the only thing in the room. This started in a tank, a neuroscientist floating in saltwater in 1954, trying to find out what a mind does when everything is removed. What he found was that the mind does not stop. It keeps running code. Code written by groups, by evolution, by the ego, by belief systems no one consciously chose. You are a biocomputer. Lilly meant this as a release. A computer that knows it is a computer can examine its own software. An awareness that can see its own simulations is no longer fully trapped inside them. Every thought during the last half hour was processed by the machine. But the thing that noticed the thoughts, the awareness that watched the programs run, was not itself a program. Nothing installed it. No one else wrote it. It is the one thing in the entire experience of being a person that was always actually one's own. Lilly spent his life looking for it. At the end, his instruction was direct. Keep the skepticism. Watch the disbelief. It too is only another form of belief. So do not believe what was said here. Run the practice. Watch what surfaces. And whatever surfaces, leave it without a name.